And once we actually sat down and got into the nitty-gritty of our literature review, we found there was very little publications having to do specifically with artificial intelligence and restoration ecology. But there are a lot of different environmental science fields that are implementing AI right now.
Welcome back to Tree Hugger Podcast. This is the show that focuses on ecological restoration. I'm your host, Michael Yadrick, and I am an ecological restoration practitioner living on Puyallup territory, now known as Tacoma, Washington. And this is the thought-provoking episode exploring the intersection of artificial intelligence and ecological restoration. I deeply appreciate your support as listeners of this independent show. For some of you who know me, I just made a switch in my day job recently, and I really hope I can keep this passion project of the podcast going. Your engagement and enthusiasm keeps me motivated to bring you insightful content on human health and livelihoods and justice in a warming world. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review, sharing it with friends, and subscribing for more. Your support helps me continue exploring the important conversations and ecological restoration that help heal our world. Thank you for being part of the community. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is a term that encompasses a wide range of technologies designed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. These tasks include learning, reasoning, problem-solving, perception, and language understanding. Some prominent types of AI can be broadly categorized into a handful of types such as narrow AI, general AI, and machine learning. Now, narrow AI, otherwise known as weak AI, is designed for specific tasks such as virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa, recommendation systems, and image recognition software. What is the weather today? That is a question that scrubs the internet for a response from your Siri. And then there's general AI, also known as strong AI, which is a theoretical concept where AI would have the ability to understand, learn, and apply knowledge across various domains, much like a human. And then machine learning is a subset of AI that focuses on enabling systems to learn from data without being explicitly programmed. Machine learning algorithms learn from patterns in data and make predictions or decisions. It includes techniques like supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. These are some concepts and terminology that come up in our conversation today. In recent years, significant attention has been given to AI and how it can be utilized in various scientific fields, including ecology. Artificial intelligence is increasingly being utilized in various aspects of our daily lives. From our smart home devices to advanced healthcare diagnostics, AI is transforming how we interact with technology and manage our environment. Specifically in ecology, AI applications are being used to monitor biodiversity, predict climate impacts, manage alienated species, and optimize restoration planning. Several industries are rapidly adopting artificial intelligence to drive innovation in the field, efficiency, and competitive advantage. The technology and IT sectors obviously lead the way, integrating AI into software, cybersecurity, and social media experiences. Retail and e-commerce leverage AI for personalized recommendations and inventory management, while my bank uses AI for fraud detection and algorithmic trading. The automotive industry also focuses on autonomous vehicles and predictive maintenance, revolutionizing their fields with advanced technologies. Meanwhile, several industries exhibit a cautious approach to adopting artificial intelligence, driven by issues of ethics, security, regulatory challenges, and the potential for job displacement. Across the industries of finance, healthcare, education, government, manufacturing, and aviation, the common themes of caution reflect a balanced consideration of AI's benefits against the potential ethical, security, and societal impacts, with a focus on ensuring robust regulatory frameworks and technological advancements to address these concerns. My guest on this show and I would consider the ecological restoration industry one of the latent adopters of AI technologies. We don't know exactly why, but it isn't showing up much in the restoration ecology literature, despite some standout restoration-adjacent applications of it. Some of the more notable AI applications currently being used in ecology are in remote sensing and data analysis. So AI-powered drones and satellite imagery analyze large areas to monitor vegetation health, detect invasive species, and assess land cover changes. I understand this is something that has been going on since the 1970s. As Landsat and satellite imagery became closer to free and more ubiquitous, then we started to see huge leaps in this type of application in the late 2000s. And then there's predictive modeling and climate impact assessment. AI helps to create habitat suitability models and predicts future climatic conditions, helping to plan conservation strategies. And then I think something that we all see creeping into our smartphone devices is species identification and monitoring. Tools like the Merlin Bird ID app and iNaturalist use AI to identify species from photos and audio recordings, supporting community science and biodiversity monitoring. And then there's invasive species management. AI systems help to police alienated species and predict their spread, allowing for early intervention and targeted removal. And then something that we talk about on this episode is AI's use in restoration planning and optimization. AI can integrate with GIS to analyze spatial data and help optimize resource planning and potential outcomes. And there are a handful of notable advocates and champions of using artificial intelligence in conservation. I'll name them here to provide some examples of who is promoting the integration of AI technologies in environmental sciences. The Nature Conservancy. This global conservation organization actively uses AI to support tasks such as habitat mapping, species identification, and climate change adaptation strategies. They have numerous projects that leverage AI to help improve conservation outcomes. Google Earth Engine, which is a cloud-based platform that provides powerful AI tools for analyzing satellite imagery and large environmental datasets. It's been instrumental in a few ecological research projects, helping scientists monitor deforestation, track wildlife populations, and study climate change impacts. There's also Conservation International. This big NGO integrates AI into its conservation strategies, using machine learning algorithms to analyze environmental data, predict biodiversity trends, and optimize conservation planning. There's also Microsoft AI for Earth. This program supports projects that apply AI to environmental challenges and provides grants, tools, and resources to researchers and organizations working on biodiversity, climate change, water, and agriculture. And lastly, there are a variety of other ecology and conservation organizations such as World Wildlife Fund and the Wildlife Conservation Society that are embracing AI to improve their research and conservation efforts. So I would consider these organizations advocates at the forefront of integrating AI into ecological research and conservation and driving the innovation of the technology and highlighting the potential to solve complex environmental challenges. So if you want to find out more about their efforts, I think they are prominently displayed on their web pages, or you could easily sort of Google around or ask ChatGPT about how their use of AI is going down. So drilling down on the conversation you are about to hear, a few months back, I saw this article, Ecological Restoration and Artificial Intelligence, Whose Values Inform a Project, by Samuel T. Woodrich and Timothy Pape. The authors explore how AI tools have been and can be applied to ecological restoration projects, the benefits and drawbacks of these tools, and the dependency on individual and institutional values that drive project goals. I'm super glad to bring Sam and Tim on the podcast to share their insights. Sam's a Ph.D. student at the Oregon State University. He focuses on habitat effects and ungulate herbivory, while Timothy, a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, will soon be joining Bowling Green State University as an assistant professor. Together, they offer a wealth of knowledge on how AI can enhance ecological restoration and the ethical considerations that come with it. They posit that while AI can be integrated into ecological restoration, practitioners must recognize the complexity and value-laden nature of these tools. AI can only factor in value-oriented variables to a certain degree, and certain restoration practices may be so value-laden that just blindly using AI could lead to undesirable outcomes. Sam really emphasizes that while AI has significant potential in ecological restoration, it must be complemented by traditional ecological knowledge, particularly that of indigenous peoples and local communities. This knowledge is critical for understanding long-term ecological changes and impacts that AI cannot fully model. Sam also highlights the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration, bringing together ecologists, computer scientists, and social scientists to develop AI applications in restoration. Dr. Timothy Pape discusses the challenges of integrating traditional knowledge into AI systems, the biases inherent in AI tools, and the necessity of keeping the human element in restoration projects. Tim points out that AI tools often reflect the perspectives of those who contribute the most data online, which can limit their effectiveness in diverse ecological contexts. He advocates for using AI cautiously and ensuring that it respects the values and priorities of local communities. So throughout our conversation, you'll hear about the potential of AI to integrate into restoration efforts, the significant challenges and ethical considerations involved, and possible steps for integrating AI into restoration projects. Ultimately, a significant concern highlighted is the underrepresentation of voices from frontline communities in the Global South in the development of AI-driven restoration and conservation strategies. This potential imbalance could very well perpetuate global social inequalities and limits the effectiveness of conservation efforts. We should call for the most inclusive and equitable approaches that incorporate the perspectives and knowledge of indigenous and local communities. Really, genuine community engagement in decision-making processes do ensure that AI technologies are used ethically and effectively where they are appropriate. My guests and I would emphasize the necessity of keeping the quote-unquote human element in ecological restoration projects. It should be seen as a tool to complement human expertise rather than replace it. So I appreciate whatever you might be doing while you listen. Grab your headphones, settle into your commute, cultivate your garden, cook some good food, get comfortable, and join us as we explore the emergence of artificial intelligence in ecological restoration. This episode is packed with information, inspiration, and a few laughs along the way. Let's get after it.
My name is Sam Woodrich. I'm a Ph.D. student at Oregon State University in the Environmental Sciences graduate program. I got my master's at Oregon State, and then I dove straight back into starting a Ph.D., and I'm currently working on some of the habitat effects of ungulate herbivory in the Central Oregon coastal region and some of the trophic cascades that are associated with that effects. I have a background in many different ecological studies, and my master's had to do with avian ecology and studying the effects of wildfire disturbance and frequency on hermit and varied thrushes. And in general, I just love being outside, looking at birds or plants and evaluating soils and checking out how everything is affected by different phenomena within a habitat.
My name is Dr. Timothy Pape. I'm currently a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I got my PhD at Oregon State University in the Environmental Sciences program as well, like Sam. I am starting an assistant professorship position at Bowling Green State University in the fall in their Earth, Environment, and Society School. My research mainly focuses on the human dimensions of ecosystem governance and things like that. And I actually got interested in restoration, ecology, and ecological restoration work by volunteer work I did in the South Cascades of Washington, Gifford Pinchot National Forest years ago, helping plant trees in riparian areas. And through that, I've always found a way of coming back to ecological restoration projects and integrating that into my own work. So yeah, thanks for having us on the podcast. Really appreciate it, Michael.
Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I really appreciate you all coming on the show. I just read your paper that published in Restoration Ecology about the use of artificial intelligence in ecological restoration, and I thought it was really compelling. It evoked some feelings in me about, I don't know, maybe a little bit of FOMO. I was like, should I be using artificial intelligence in my restoration? And also be like, who is using artificial intelligence in ecological restoration? A little bit of an unknown. And I feel like obviously we are living through this technological transition, I would suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know if you all would agree right now in this time in 2024. And AI is really, different technologies are finding their ways into our lives and our practices. And I thought it'd be good to talk with you all, just flush it out a little bit and see what you know.
Really, we had a similar outlook on what AI use is being used in ecology in general. And when Tim and I were sitting down, just brainstorming some ideas for a new paper to publish in restoration ecology, we started bouncing ideas back and forth of what are some hot topics that we can combine with artificial intelligence and some sort of ecological study. And without doing any sort of literature review at that moment when we were talking, we just decided out of the blue to talk about restoration ecology since it's such an important up and coming field that is crucial for the climate catastrophe that we're on a trajectory for right now. We established this idea of let's talk about how artificial intelligence is being used for planning restoration ecology projects, for evaluating them, and then for reviewing them. And once we actually sat down and got into the nitty gritty of our literature review, we found there was very little publications having to do specifically with artificial intelligence and restoration ecology. But there are a lot of different environmental science fields that are implementing AI right now in just other ways than restoration ecology.
Yeah, and that kind of motivated why we wanted to write the article, because we're pretty well versed in the space. I'd say Sam and I are, and in fact, we were unaware of how this tool, we view it, or at least I think I view it very much as a tool, is being used in these types of projects. There just weren't a lot of examples. And obviously restoration projects have these long sort of timelines. And so I think that's a bit of it in that this technology, this tool is pretty recent. And then to be able to evaluate its usefulness is a bit difficult when you think of a restoration project, because often you're thinking of 5, 10, 15, 20-year timelines to evaluate the success of a project like that. So I think we started to think, well, maybe there needs to be some kind of article that puts some just ideas out there for guardrails and ways of using this tool, these tools, that sort of borrows from the existing use of these kind of tools in other places, climate modeling, things like that. And so, yeah, that kind of motivated putting it together. But we're like with you, Michael, there is this new space. And I feel like there's some other interesting articles that have come out in just in the last maybe 6 months, 12 months that are starting to suggest how AI could be used. Restoration Ecology had an article just a couple of weeks ago that maybe we can talk about more later, but about how drones could be using AI to help with seeding and microsites. And it's really interesting. But again, it's people teaching the AI how to then do this thing as opposed to just hoping the AI has the answers. And I think that's what we're interested in.
Okay, great. So we established a baseline, I think. So really, we're all on the same page. There's not much out there in the literature anyway about a specific AI being used in ecological restoration. However, you said you found like maybe one or a handful of papers.
Yeah, we came across during a literature review one specific paper that is currently using machine learning algorithms and some AI help with that to identify potential sites to restore for terrestrial habitats. This was just a thought piece, more of like the implication of how machine learning could be used and not for like policy changes. And it took place somewhere in China as well. The literature for it, or the paper published, is very, in my opinion, in the weeds of how machine learning works. And so a lot of it was over my head in terms of what an ecologist can understand for implementing AI. But nonetheless, the practicality of using machine learning to identify locations where terrestrial habitats should be prioritized for restoration projects was the bread and butter of the paper. And they were successful in showing that this was a efficient, cost-effective method of doing so.
Well, and Sam found this paper about sort of bioacoustics and AI processes that were being put together to track birds in an actual conservation area and see if biodiversity was going up and if birds were returning to an area. And so we used that as one of those things. It's not necessarily about ecological restoration, but it was more about tracking sort of indicators of conservation restoration projects. And so there are some of those sort of examples, and we can work those in to show there's ways of using these tools that aren't maybe all encompassing. I think one of our worries, and we talked about it a lot, like people will go and ask a chatbot or a chat GPT and say, here are just some characteristics of my property or of this area or this farm, whatever I want to restore. Here are the characteristics. Tell me what I should do. And I think we were worried that's sort of the way that AI tools and chatbot tools could actually lead restoration practitioners awry, in that they think that some form of generative AI can just tell them, hey, this is the best kind of plan for you and your property based on the data that I have and what I'm accessing. And I think that's where we started to say, we worry that people might do that. Now, select sort of tools. You've already decided maybe what you want the project outcomes to look like. And now using an AI tool for that, that might be a better use of AI than just saying, take the wheel AI and tell me how to do this.
Right. These chat rooms, AI algorithms that we see, like ChatGPT being the most common and prevalent one, at least when we were writing this in 2023, they go off of just generating some sort of prediction or some sort of advice based on whatever their best idea is, which is based off of hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of papers or articles or web pages or conversations that they've had prior. And so while these chat programs pride themselves on trying to refine the best answer that they can give you for any sort of question that you can ask it, what we were mainly interested in is how can we use advanced machine learning, artificial intelligence software programs or uses for restoration ecology instead or as opposed to having a conversation with a chatbot or something like that to give you a prescription. As in 2024 right now, there is no program that we can think of that will give you the best case scenario or information or predictions from artificial intelligence. Certainly not better than a restoration ecologist could or an expert in the field. However, when restoration ecologists or other experts are working on a project and want to evaluate the success of that project, or if they're going to meet their restoration goals, or what is this location going to look like, or even what areas should we prioritize for restoration, that is where artificial intelligence should be integrated and is currently being integrated in other environmental fields and could be very applicable to restoration ecology. And that's what we were trying to articulate in our paper.
Nice. Yeah, I really appreciate your all's forethought on this. I can imagine like maybe we're 10 years in the future of a previous podcast conversation about the internet or something. Like the internet is going to change restoration ecology. And I can imagine like we'll be in a place 10 years from now and just thinking back to 2024 and being like, yeah, remember when we thought AI was like not going to be a thing or we were so scared of it? But the ethics of it are really, I think, important to put at the forefront. Yeah, I do want to acknowledge that I use ChatGPT to prepare for this conversation. So it's not like something I want to hide. Yeah, and the generative AI is just like one form of artificial intelligence that's out there.
Right.
And it has probably its limitations. Like
it's the most accessible one. And so I think that's when we were thinking of AI, we're kind of like, well, people are starting to just go to this well and say, how can you help me with this thing? And the paper I was referencing was in Humanities and Social Sciences Communications. And it's literally titled AI Chatbots Contribute to Global Conservation Injustices. And basically they found that 2/3 of the responses that ChatGPT was giving them came from expertise of male academics working at universities in the United States. And so basically this idea that, oh, it will give me a wide breadth of knowledge or a wide sort of idea and expertise. It's really just, well, there's this kind of bias or this narrow kind of bias that's going to come when you use these tools, because really what they're doing is just scrubbing all of the information that's also easily accessible and integrating it in rather than going out of its way to try to find things. But basically said only 7% of responses came from low and middle income countries. And so that's probably because their research and their knowledge is harder to get on the internet. We were just discussing. And since ChatGPT is just scrubbing the internet, then that's how it comes about, that you get these sort of biased answers.
And in the restoration ecology field or aspect, how do you train a program like ChatGPT or any other sort of AI chatbot to prioritize like preserving the Pacific U or like the indigenous people's relation to a landscape or to a habitat or ecosystem or an animal or anything like that? And how do you quantify that clearly to dollar signs or like what the land is worth or what the cost of a restoration project would be? It's just the same old conversation of how do we value a landscape or a habitat, but now we're talking about on artificial intelligence level scale of convincing or having that fed into machine learning algorithms of how that is going to be antiquated or prioritized or prescribed in a restoration ecology project plan.
Right. And like the nuance that comes from all of that, we referenced in the paper that Aldo Leopold, one of the pioneers, one often thinks of with ecological restoration. In Sand County Almanac, it talks about how I probably am prioritizing pine trees in my own work, in my own restoration project, but I like pine trees. I like seeing them. And so I think when you think of those things and how would AI be able to even integrate that? It would take a lot. It would take a lot to say, oh, we're going to try to integrate these stakeholders and these people's, because their values can be hard to maybe quantify. It's what a lot of my other work is in more of a qualitative fashion, that it is hard to quantify just one individual's value constellation and values that they have. It's even harder to quantify a community, the stakeholders, people beyond that, even maybe restoration project. a lot of restoration projects have partners who aren't even on the ground in that area, who have their own values and their own kind of desires for how that project should look or should be. And how does AI integrate that seems difficult and not necessarily impossible, but it seems like it puts more and more tasks on humans to then task to the AI to try to then still put it all together.
Yeah, exactly. As a certified ecological restoration practitioner, I follow the principles and standards of ecological restoration put out there by SCR. And the first two principles are like engage stakeholders, right? So that's mostly when I think engage stakeholders, it's like face-to-face interaction. Right. And number two is generate or really consider different knowledge systems, right? So it's like not only Western science, but like local expertise as well as indigenous wisdom as well. So yeah, I think there are some limitations too. Like, the weak AI that I think that's ubiquitous in our lives right now, like Siri and Alexa, who we think it's really cool that we can get the weather forecast, but they're really just like searching and just retrieving information or just playing my favorite song that I've just asked. And it's like really simple. And then there's actually these more sophisticated AIs, I think, that I've come to learn about, this more strong AI that maybe has the ability to understand or learn, or this machine learning, which focuses on like enabling systems to learn from data that's been programmed. So I think it's worth distinguishing between these different categories. Yeah, and doing my research for this show too, I was thinking about which apps we're using are using artificial intelligence. And so there are apps that perhaps are not explicitly AI, or just don't say it out loud, I guess. They are very sophisticated, but maybe we just don't know we're using AI too, but it's just becoming normalized a little bit. Like I think you mentioned Google Earth climate models, or let me see, iNaturalist. You take a picture of a plant that you don't know and it tells you, and maybe you trust that information or you don't. Perhaps keeping the humans looped in is very important. And I feel like that's a theme that y'all are talking about.
Well, while we're on the topic of iNaturalist and other potential AI use or integrated apps that we use every day, the first instance I ever came across was the Merlin bird app by Cornell. The sound identification software is artificially intelligence backed or machine learning backed. I'm not too sure, but that is something that has relatively low cost for AI use. You can have someone who doesn't know anything about birds try to ID something in their backyard, and there's no real downside to using that. And there's also, for that single user, no way of confirming or denying whether that app is identifying a bird call correctly or not. The trouble with artificial intelligence and checking if what it's saying is accurate or related to your conversation in terms of restoration ecology arises when you have much more substantial decisions being made. And so iNaturalist is a somewhat intermediate tier of that, in which you are providing, as a citizen scientist, information for potentially a PhD student or a master's student or some grant proposal writer to base their entire livelihoods on, or what they're studying. And that can be hindered, to say the least, by an incorrect identification of a rare plant in a certain location. And so that's where iNaturalist has been very efficient in their model of how they check whether or not their artificial image identification system is working or not, by having research grade reviews and having more than one actual person review these sort of things based on a volunteer perspective. So experts come into the app, they find a plant or a family or anything that they want to ID, or outside of plants, of course. And then they can either confirm or deny whether or not the original post is that species. And if more than one person does that and they're all on board, unanimously calling it the same thing, then it's marked as research grade. If you have enough of that going on, then you have the potential for large spatial scale studies of species distribution or habitat change or encounters of a plant or species in general. So that's where artificial intelligence is really benefiting by the human perspective, at least in this example, of how we can keep AI intact, of what's right, what's wrong. Is it giving you good information? Is it a correct identification in a moderate to high risk sort of situation that has major ecological implications?
Yeah, I think all what Sam just said is a great way of framing successful and useful applications of AI. But there is, again, back to the human element, this idea of, well, you're still using maybe a phone or a device to then practice, ecology, to do a restoration project. And I was thinking of reading some of E.O. Wilson's books, and he has such a idea that if you want to understand nature, you need to know everything's Latin name. He had that was one of his things, that he wants everyone to know the Latin name. If you don't, do you really know what that species is? And so again, that's just a value he had, that he thought that connected you or tied you closer to a particular species. I don't agree with that. No offense to E.O. Wilson. But it sort of goes back to the human element, that like there are probably people who think the new ecologists who go out there with all their iPhones taking photos to understand what they're doing. Well, we used to just stare at our textbooks and figure out what things were so that we could know it better, and that we don't have to use our brain space of that, as opposed to maybe newer ecologists who maybe say, well, I don't have to do that. I can use these tools, which I think is actually a benefit, and I think a positive, but that's my personal opinion. And I think there are other people who might think differently. Even when we were talking about the drone, I was thinking the drone, and they're teaching the drone where to seed better in these microsites that will be more successful for future restoration. But if you as a restoration team value quiet in the area you're restoring, I don't know that if you're out there recreating or just actually doing other work and a drone blazes by you very loudly, dropping seeds probably fairly loudly as well, that maybe a value that you had wanted for this restoration project to be implemented in has been lost because you made a value choice. You said the efficiency of getting seeds into microsites is more important than having vehicles flying in the sky, and like that's an interesting thought, that we have to remember that when you choose to use this, there are these value oriented aspects to it that you have to then say, is that what you actually want your restoration project to look like? Do you want it to look like a Blade Runner, that there's just drones flying all around shooting seeds everywhere? Is that what you think of when you think of the restoration project that you're administering?
Yeah, you mentioned drones now, and I forget that my buddy who lives half a mile away from me flies drones for Washington Department of Transportation as part of planning future mitigation and fish passage and everything as freeway projects go in. So I should probably ask him, but I feel like drones and UAV monitoring is a pretty common form of AI, and just perhaps like the mapping and the monitoring and the sort of like spatial analysis, I think a lot of us are used to using for planning restoration. So I feel like that it's a way that it can be used to analyze the vegetation health. Like I think this year, for example, there's going to be LiDAR flown of the state, or at least of our region, to look at tree canopy cover. But I think there is pretty sophisticated ways that AI is finding its way into our practice.
Right. I think when we talk about artificial intelligence or AI, there's just a massive separation in people's understanding of what that really means. Like you were saying, look at Alexa or Google or whatever, spitting back whatever suggested song that you think you should be listening to. And they say, oh, wow, this is artificial intelligence. This is the way of the future. And then you have people deep in academia that are modeling and creating machine learning algorithms that are taking data points from spatial or temporal sets and trying to predict what future habitat conditions will be like. And they're preaching, oh, this is artificial intelligence in its peak. But at the end of the day, they're both doing similar things. They're taking information that we already have that is stored somewhere, that is not usually analyzed by one single person or by a group of individuals, but is instead able to be analyzed relatively quickly or quicker than ever before using machine learning algorithms, and then spit out some model prediction. The same way that your playlist is being looked at by artificial intelligence is the same way that Google Earth Engine is using artificial intelligence to take massive spatial scales of data and then generate some sort of prediction. So one of the papers that we have been briefly talking about in this podcast so far has to do with Google Earth Engine and integrating machine learning algorithms to take spatial scales unimaginable before this time and find consistencies in habitat conditions or in landscape conditions or in some sort of ecological criteria, and then generate a prediction for what future climate change effects will have across the entire Earth or across entire continents or in some sort of massive landscape scale. And while that has not been used for like policy changes and is still trapped behind the academic integrity wall of just a thought piece, this is still just the dawn of the potential for what artificial intelligence could be used. And we try to relate that to restoration ecology by drawing comparison of, well, if you're a restoration project manager and you have a reference system that you want to have your restored system eventually achieve or become, you can collect data within that reference. You can collect data within other intact habitats surrounding that restoration site. And then you can use machine learning to quantify what are some projected trajectories for your restoration site to then reach this reference system. So what are some different methods that you can apply in restoration ecology? What are some individual changes to your plan that you can make that might benefit or might hinder your progress to this reference site?
Right. And the future is unpredictable at the end of the day, too. So, like, even with the best modeling, if somebody goes camping and accidentally lights a fire in an area and burns the entire half of a forest down, that's going to change all of the modeling, all of the predictive sort of tools and work that was done. And so I think we also sort of wanted to present that in this paper and in general, that like people can't then say, well, then our AI model predictions were wrong, or this restoration sort of tool we used, how is this so wrong? And we say, oh, well, maybe an unforeseen natural occurrence happened. But I think what we were also talking at is, or an unforeseen human occurrence. Even with the climate modeling, if every country in the world just said, we're going to chop down every tree, we all have lost our minds and that's what we're all going to do tomorrow. Every climate model we have would be completely wrong if every country just created a law that said everyone go out and chop down trees, right? But we hope that never would happen. But it does mean that you can't then rely on a model and say, this is 100% how it's going to be in the future, because there's this sort of chaos that comes from just having humans involved in social ecological systems, which we find really interesting, but I think is why we really want to put that where it should be for AI and view them as tools. I think that's when we were discussing this paper, we go like, I mean, it's still a tool. It's not a stakeholder. It's a tool. It's not somebody who's saying, well, this is how I'd like it to be. It's a tool. And if it becomes sentient someday and can say, here's how I think this project should be because you've passed all the bars of sentience, sure, that's a whole different conversation and quite an interesting think piece probably as well. But for now, it is a tool. And I actually went to a conference last year at the Society of Human Ecology on AI, and some folks were like, look, I asked AI to come up with some nature poetry. And look, this is sentience almost. And it was like, well, or that's just AI doing its best to trick you into thinking that this poetry feels like real poetry that someone would have made. I don't know. I was like, I don't know enough about how we would evaluate sentience to say, yes, I guess this AI bot that you were talking to became sentient because it wrote you a poem that mimics Shakespeare, I guess.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, I love word clouds still. So I do love to see that as using that sort of data to see the most common things that are said. So I think that's like analogous to the poetry almost, or you're just taking the most common used poetry and regurgitating it, perhaps. I don't know.
No, totally.
It's no C3PO.
I don't think so. Even I said to the when I was having the conversation, I said, how is this different than when the IBM Blue was playing chess and it won at the chess game? Now you're just a professor of English and it's beating you at, look, I made poetry. Isn't this real poetry? Did the AI say, no, thank you, I don't want to make poetry, even though that was my prompt? Once it does that, once you ask AI, hey, I'd like you to tell me what would be an interesting restoration project here, and it says, not today, thank you. Then I assume we have sentient AI.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is important to note that people, mostly white guys, have been talking about AI for like, I don't know, 70 years, I think, at this point or something. You talk about we can't know what the future looks like, but I'd like to entertain. I just started to think about what you foresee as ways to keep diverse values and priorities of local communities and stakeholders in the game revolving around restoration projects, and maybe just some ways to integrate traditional ecological methods and knowledge into restoration. Just some like best practices to keep in mind. I don't expect you to have this in any order of priority, but I think that would be helpful for folks as they're listening to the show.
Well, I think just following the Society for Ecological Restoration guidelines is still the bread and butter of how we should be prioritizing ecological restoration projects. I think what we were trying to articulate the most in our paper is that the artificial intelligence should be used as a tool, but it should also be developed more interdisciplinarily between fields, since restoration ecologists are somewhat isolated in the ecology field in terms of they have no idea what the future of a site will look like. They can only make guesses based off of how other reference conditions are around their restoration site. And they can also use their expertise and their education and all sort of experiences they've had up to that point as more of an insight of what your restoration site will turn out to be as time progresses. But one of the hardest things to capture in restoration ecology are some of the effects of your restoration that don't occur within like a human lifespan, or don't occur within a project timeline, or don't occur within the budget of your project. And so you're left helpless in terms of, well, was this the most efficient thing that you could be doing with your time and your money? Or was there another ecological restoration initiative that you could have done that would have benefited the site some more? I think that's where artificial intelligence could help the most, but it's also where traditional ecological knowledge plays more of a key role at this moment in time. Indigenous people's experiences with landscapes, the connectedness between humans and the environment that they live in, an understanding of how restoration practices affect a landscape, or how the removal or harvesting of plants affect the landscape, or how the preservation of species can benefit or hinder the ecological system of a landscape, is all going to be based on traditional ecological knowledge that people have lived within these areas for generations. Artificial intelligence is not able to model that because it is still, if you want to quantify it as a data set, it's still data that's in a person's mind, or in a family generation's perspective of how they affect the landscape themselves. And that is not easily quantifiable, and definitely not easy to implement into a machine learning algorithm. It is still based off of the experiences that an individual has. So long answer short, it still is based heavily on traditional ecological knowledge of how humans affect the landscape, the experiences that humans have within a habitat, and just prior instances and disturbances that have happened, and capturing that through a person or a group of people's experiences within a habitat is going to be far more beneficial than anything artificial intelligence can provide at this moment.
Yeah. And I think to the idea that a lot of traditional ecological knowledge, local ecological knowledge, lives inside people's brains and is not on the internet like we were talking. I mean, a lot of these AI tools they're just trying to take that existing data. And so what we were saying with that earlier paper, only 2% of the responses on ChatGPT came with traditional or ecological knowledge expertise integrated into it. And that's just because that's probably proportional to the amount of knowledge that is put on the internet in that way from these types of communities potentially. And so, yeah, I think it is really going, hey, we maybe shouldn't use an AI tool early on, because early on, it's going to have these biases we can't control. Once we've made our decisions from a project perspective, then integrating AI later on, because we've made the choices, we've already articulated our values. That's part of why we got to the values, because I think a lot of traditional ecological knowledge, local ecological knowledge, things like that, have these embedded values in them that are different than the embedded values that traditional Western, maybe science would have, this idea of growing something back. And there are types of restoration projects that wouldn't want to have too much growth in it, potentially. If you're restoring certain types of savannas or things like that, you don't necessarily want trees if you want to restore it in that way. You could restore it in a different way. And I think it goes to some of my other work of just restoration as an idea is a little more of an abstract term, especially the way we all use it within ecological restoration. And so similarly, within traditional and local communities, with their knowledge bases, sometimes they're using the land in a way that to integrate that into a restoration project or into a restoration sort of AI tool, the tool may say, well, we don't want actually people harvesting, we're trying to actually restore it. And they may be confused, because I think that level of nuance is actually pretty difficult for tools and people who are not in the space to understand that there might be an aspect of harvesting. I think my wife does some research on bear grass, which actually might help the bear grass to grow and proliferate better. It might, and certain people would say that this is true, but I don't know that there's enough Western science that would speak to that. And so, yeah, I think that's how we connected up some of that into the paper, and hopefully future people thinking about this and doing it will think about it.
I just also want to briefly say that if you've ever read a paper where it says such and such said something and it has a quotation of personal conversation, that is a prime example of something that artificial intelligence will never be able to capture, is that for all the information that's out there that is referenced, that is built into the machine learning algorithm of artificial intelligence, there are still millions of thoughts and ideas and conversations that take place that AI would never have an understanding of or never have the ability to even capture and reference.
Well, and then even along those lines, if it then captures it now as a published paper that says that, it might think that's a different level of scientific fact or scientific knowledge because now it's been put that way. But I don't know that AI, at least from my experience, has the ability to differentiate that this was some type of knowledge that was brought to the attention of the researchers in a different kind of way.
Unless they're listening on our phones, the microphones,
All
right?
the
I don't,
time. To all.
yeah, I know. I don't want to take it to the conspiracy level theory, but it could happen. So we've emphasized the importance of hands-on learning, talking with rights holders and stakeholders and communities. I think, Tim, you said you went to a conference and you went to this certain session on AI and human ecology. And I think we mentioned the principles and standards of ecological restoration. Well, the podcast is one too. Are there other resources you think folks should get up to speed on? Is there a sort of learning that we should be engaging in?
Yeah, I think it's just a diversity of resources and places that you get your information. I think Restoration Ecology as a journal is a fantastic journal, and I think one of the best academic journals in the world. And I think it's partially one of the best academic journals in the world because it has a lot of people who don't work in academia who also publish in it and who also are involved in this sort of ecosystem of SARES, like you said, and things like that. And so actually looking for organizations that are more inclusive, that then bring knowledge in diverse ways to ecological restoration is really one of the best ways you can find information, because I think there aren't a lot of places that don't slowly become too niche for their own good. And I think the Society of Ecological Restoration really tries to, I think, be a big tent. And a lot of the things that come out of that organization, including the journal, I think are great resources, personally.
I think along that mentality of what is the future of artificial intelligence and what is going to be the most useful practice of it in restoration ecology is having more interdisciplinary collaboration. If you are a professor or someone in academia that has some sort of grant writing power and also is in a position to mentor other students, I think it is worth your while to look into other colleges for other students that are studying either software engineering or computer science or something outside of your ecological realm. Some of the best papers I can think of that have to do with like trophic cascade effects and like evaluating large scale changes to habitat distributions across the planet are coming from software engineers or are coming from people that are more well versed in computer sciences than a traditional ecologist is. And to put it on the flip side, if you're a student and you are interested in getting your degree in higher education, and you're not necessarily interested in maybe applied sciences, but you are interested in machine learning or artificial intelligence or any sort of a computer side or computer-oriented study, you should talk to other ecologists or other professors that are in either environmental sciences or ecology fields, conservation bio, anything like that, to collaborate with professors and brainstorm ideas of how your degree could be used for some sort of applied science position. I think collaboration goes both ways. I've had some fantastic conversations with just students of mine, both in undergrad and other graduate programs at Oregon State, that are all gung-ho on studying artificial intelligence or advancing or understanding machine learning algorithms, but they aren't necessarily interested in ecology per se. But collaboration between ecologists and computer scientists or other people that are interested in computer software and machine learning would benefit greatly our collective understanding of how ecosystems work and how restoration ecology can be applied in a more practical way. I wouldn't rely as heavily on corporations that are advertising it or subscriptions for artificial intelligence software at this moment in 2024, just because I haven't found any that are applicable in a real world scenario that benefit restoration ecology directly.
Dovetailing off what Sam said, and obviously as a social scientist, I also think there's a lot of places for the social sciences to sort of integrate in there too, because at the end of the day, any restoration project is a normative endeavor. People have come together and raised funds and put together a project or a plan to do a thing. So I do think anthropology, sociology, understanding how these things come together, and then understanding how those things then will be viewed from a outcomes and success perspective, I think, is how then we can integrate with AI and integrate it into projects in more successful ways. Because I think it really is an often missed opportunity when a restoration project is being visioned and thought of to say, what do we actually want this to look like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years? And what is the potential for those successful outcomes, those things that were our goals, to alter and change in time? And I think a lot of times, because adapting to those things can be difficult for people and for obviously ecosystems that are being altered, I think that's another way of just pushing that idea into restoration projects more substantially, I think.
Great. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's amazing. I feel like we're sharing ideas right now, like up and down the West Coast and across to the Midwest right now. I really, really do appreciate the technology. I do hope I see you all in person someday. The conversation's not over. I wonder if we missed anything.
One thing, maybe not completely related to restoration ecology per se. If you are a student and you are looking to brainstorm some ideas of what your focal study would be or what some of your interests are, machine learning algorithms and artificial intelligence are very good sources for you to brainstorm with. If you're giving it a prompt and an idea, or just want a quick answer generated based on the best available knowledge that a artificial intelligence software could give you, you could give it a prompt, you can read what it has to say, and you can go on with your own intuition of what you want to research from that point forward. If you have a brainstorming idea, or if you want to just optimize how you study, or if you want to figure out different ways that you can research the most efficiently a certain topic, you can use artificial intelligence to your benefit to generate a quick task for you to complete, for you to gain a quick understanding of a certain topic. I think that as a teaching assistant in some undergraduate programs, we've been instructed to hinder students from using different tools like AI, or like to say like plagiarism is rampant with this and you're not going to get anything beneficial. And it's just the same thing that we were hearing about using Wikipedia when I was in elementary school and whatnot.
Well, or the same thing as using a calculator once upon a time. I mean, so again, it's just a tool. And I think that's something that I think, well, if you don't learn how to do long division by hand, like you will never be successful. And it's, well, yeah. Or if you have a calculator and you see a big number and you want to just divide it. And so I think that's something Sam and I have talked a lot. And I think the paper tries to just propose that, which is like, this is a tool. It could be a very useful tool. As an instructor in classes, I have grappled with it myself, but I've often said the more transparent a student is about their use of AI tools, the better they are going to use those tools. It's when students pretend like they didn't use maybe an AI tool and say, this came out of my brain. And you go like, okay, well, I mean, this is quite sophisticated. So really. So I think that's what I think is the place that academia is, and everyone is trying to figure out, which is let's just actually make the processes around using AI tools more transparent, but also recognize that they're tools as opposed to secret genies that can do your homework for you.
It's far more beneficial for a professional in academia to talk about how AI could be used, and to especially not steer students away from not using it. It just hurts everybody involved if you're someone in a position of power in academia saying, don't use this, or like you will be deemed for academic misconduct if you submit something using it or anything like that. It's far better to discuss with your students. This is something that is prevalent in all aspects of the university right now, in all studies. It should be used to your benefit, but it should also be highlighted as a tool, and you are the user of that tool itself. It shouldn't be controlling you. You should be using it to give you suggestions, to give you feedback, to brainstorm with. And it definitely shouldn't be avoided at all costs, because when that mentality is applied to a student's learning mind, then they are fundamentally missing out on an opportunity to learn and master a new tool that will ultimately be coming up in a job interview or in your professional career or in any sort of future circumstance from that point forward.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate your all's perspective from academia. I also think I'm like a few years out of any academic pursuit, but yeah, there's appropriateness in the workplace as well. I feel like sometimes I don't feel like the workplace I just left or the new one, we're not really talking about like our values and how to use generative AI. And so it's in ChatGPT tools or whatever comes out of Google. So it is really great to be transparent about it, acknowledge it, and just navigate the future together. That's a great way to cap off the conversation. So, all right, you all ready for rapid fire questions?
Sure.
I love these. I don't know if I know, look, you're shifting in your chairs. I'm not really sure. All right, first question. And we'll go one word answer. Restoration is blank.
Crucial.
Complex.
Boom. Wow. So glad. That's quick. This is the quickest answers ever. Do you all have a mundane skill or a habit that you possess that might help you get through the day?
Using an espresso machine to make a perfect cappuccino every morning.
Folding laundry. I worked at the Gap in high school, and to quote Russ Cole from season 1 of True Detective, be careful what you get good at.
I have a question. Do you use the cardboard?
Well, I know exactly what you're talking about now. I don't even need that. My wife will often be like, wow, this looks like we're at a store.
Yeah. There was a time in my life where I traveled a lot, where I used this Eagle Creek thing where I used to just be able to, put my clothes together so fast and boogie. That's cool. I appreciate that one. Yeah, and cappuccino. I had such a good one yesterday. Yeah. What's your favorite book about nature or the environment?
Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey.
I'm going to do, I think, The Overstory by Richard Powers or Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold.
Sand County Almanac is going to be my second.
Yeah, I know. I was struggling between the two. That's probably actually my first. I don't know why I said it second. So we have ours be in alignment there.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, whipped out some Edward Abbey. All right. How about a favorite movie or TV show featuring restoration, which are few and far between, or AI?
I wouldn't call it my favorite, but it's really the only one I can think of for AI off the cuff is as iRobot. But that's a pretty negative outlook for this conversation of what AI really can do to benefit you. I'd say for restoration, I really like Kiss the Ground on Netflix. It's something that we were showing our students in a sustainability class that I ended up liking a lot. I was never a soil scientist or even interested in soils until I really watched that.
Kiss the Ground is excellent. I would say my favorite restoration movie it's just a subplot of it, but probably The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. There's definitely a restoration, ecological restoration aspect to the Ent storyline. So yeah, I really like that. And for AI, I think I would say Avengers Age of Ultron. I feel like the anthropomorphizing of good AI versus bad AI is sort of a great way of thinking of how humans can't just understand things without it being like, well, there's good AI or there's bad AI. There can't just be a neutral AI. And that those are both such mainstream movies, I think is interesting in terms of those two topics.
These are great answers. If you could have any superpower, what would it be? But you really couldn't really use it for anything like traditional superpower.
Being able to identify every ingredient in a food or like a plate or something like that. I think having the knowledge of, oh man, this is exactly coriander's in this with a little bit of, I don't know, gram masala or something like that, and picking it out and distinguishing exactly what you like. That would also get way more complex when like eating a bag of Cheetos or something, and then you have to just rattle off a bunch of preservatives.
Oh, that's pretty good. Probably teleportation. I guess I wouldn't use it for any nefarious or positive outcomes. I like to travel. I just don't like the all of what you have to do to get somewhere.
I appreciate that one too. I kind of like road trips. Like I went over to the other side of the mountains yesterday, but as well as I was like, oh man, the
just
journey
be there all of a sudden.
The journey is important. I think it's cool, like the conversations in the car, whatever. But sometimes I'm just like, man, I wish I could just be on the other side of the mountains.
Yeah, just because you have teleportation doesn't mean you have to always use it.
All right, what's a go-to dance move at a party?
I can't really dance. I would say like anything goofy. I don't know. The Harlem Shake.
Pretty good. I think Jay-Z like 20 years ago said, if you struggle dancing, just put your two arms in front of your chest and just move up and down, and that's dancing. And so it's really mostly how I dance.
Nice. I'm glad you explained it because, yeah, we're only audio, not video. Okay, cool. What's your biggest inspiration in the field of ecology? You can dance this both ways. Or who is your biggest inspiration in the field of ecology?
I mean, For the what is portion, it's definitely just the feeling of being out in a site that has been restored and is currently healthy or has some aesthetic appeal to it or whatever it might be for the individual there experiencing it. The feeling of that experience is what drives me to be interested in restoration ecology and to work with restoration ecologists of how to chase that feeling and to give others after me that same opportunity to experience that, to just be out in nature and to have that overwhelming calm and serenity when they're out in the environment. That's what does it for me, mainly.
And birds. That's great. I guess the who and how, I guess, is similar for me and similar to what Sam just said. I just find it inspiring and interesting to some degree, maybe even more than inspiring. Just that people choose to ecologically restore ecosystems, to go and spend their time and energy and money sometimes on those endeavors. I find that fascinating, but also inspiring and somewhat hopeful, I think.
Nice. What is your favorite type of ecosystem? Total overall fave or type of ecosystem to help restore?
I always find myself gravitating towards the desert, the Sonoran Desert in particular. I would also say like sagebrush steppe ecosystems are really nice. Anything where the springs are spectacular after a good rain in the winter or a good snow in the winter is what I'm gravitating towards.
Yeah, I very much enjoy riparian ecosystems, and that's where I've done most of the restoration work I've done. I just find them peaceful, the water. I find them restorative to me. So that's part of, I was debating, do I say it? It restores me while I restore it.
We're all connected.
Yeah, they definitely take care of us. We take care of them. All right. Great stuff. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Good to meet y'all.
Yeah,
I really
thank you, Michael.
appreciate
Pleasure.
your contributions on this theme, and I hope this is seed some thoughts out there in the world. So
Yeah,
really appreciate y'all.
appreciate what you do, Michael, and your podcast. It's really a great thing that you're putting out there into the world. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Michael. Appreciate it.
That wraps up this episode of Tree Hugger Podcast. I'm Michael Yadrick, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Please check the show description for more information about our amazing guests, Sam Woodrich and Dr. Timothy Pape, where you can learn more about them and other episodes online at treehuggerpod.com. Remember, it takes a community to keep a podcast like this going. As an independent show, every contribution makes a difference. If you'd like to support us, you can donate via the mobile payment services at the links provided in the show notes. Your generosity helps cover the small overhead costs of producing the show. Find the show on social media at TreeHuggerPod to stay updated and join the conversation. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review me on your preferred podcast platform. Your support helps others find the show. And don't forget to tell your friends about us too. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. See you in the woods. But
Right.
I was thinking about, I will do feel like it's really important to acknowledge, sorry. I don't know if you can hear that.
No.
Dog is drinking water. It's fine. It's normal. This happens like 1 out of every 4 podcasts.
That's
Very thirsty. Okay. Hydrated. Okay. Cool. This is what happens in the studio. What was I saying?